a biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Through this conversation, our purpose, though, is to share hope, not to get further bogged down. The answer, we're going to talk about the answers to enduring hardships, finding resilience, the staying power to just keep going, the courage to take that next step when it just feels too hard. And Wendy Burns is going to encourage us. Her recent book, Unmask, Stop Hiding and Start Living, that's the name of her recent book. It's about transformation through trauma and pain into joy and purpose. That's the little blurb. But Wendy has her own powerful story, and she's going to share that too, about how we can embrace God's purpose for us. But just a little bit of info about Wendy, although I know she's been on before, so she's a regular guest, but she is an internationally certified Maxwell leadership coach, speaker and trainer. She speaks on topics such as leadership and empowering women, as well as suicide, domestic violence, alcoholism, sexual assault, all this actually from the viewpoint of a survivor. So plan now to call in with questions or comments. I can guarantee there will be two Wendys on the line for you. The talkback line will open shortly. It's 1-800-316-316. Welcome to 2020, Wedny Burns.
Hello, Wedny Francis. It is confusing, isn't it, having two Wendys on the call today, but always a pleasure to be back on 2020 and lovely to have you as...
Your voice is just a little bit delayed with me, so I'm going to take it easy. I tend to talk before my brain works, which people have just witnessed what's happened. But I would be surprised if there was anyone listening today who doesn't understand what it feels like when you just feel like you just can't do it anymore. You know, the whole Nike just do it. Well, you just get to the stage where you just can't do it anymore. There's a feeling of being overwhelmed, and personal stories are always so incredibly powerful. So I wonder if you would, in this first part of our conversation, perhaps other people have heard it before, but there'll be listeners who haven't heard from you before. Would you be able to share your own story a little with us, Wendy?
Sure, and Neil usually does get me to do a very brief share of my story, and it's very hard to share in a couple of minutes, and like you, there's a bit of a delay, so I'll take it slowly. I grew up in a home that was filled to overflowing with domestic violence and alcohol abuse. Both of my parents were alcoholics, and that was the life we lived in. It was very abusive, very violent, never knowing from one day to the next what was going to happen. As a child, as I grew up with three sisters and one brother. When I was 13, everything changed even worse than what it already was. That day, my parents had been drinking all day. My dad, after drinking all day, came home, and my mum, and my dad laid on my bed, and he asked me to get his rifle for him, or his gun. And I always did what he told me, because if I didn't, I wore the consequences of that. And I love my dad. It didn't matter. And I think the thing about domestic violence, isn't it, as a child, even though that violence is going on around you, you still love your parents in it, which is a hard thing to overcome. I handed him the gun, and he immediately told me, this is how you kill yourself. And he killed himself in front of me, and I won't go into the details of how that happened.
I'm sorry I've interrupted you, but I just gasped. Yep. Keep going.
Yeah, no, yes, 13, hard to believe that somebody who supposedly loves and cares for a child would expose them to such a violent thing that I had to work my way through. That night, it was incredibly, I took out, my story, I've written a book called Remarkable You that tells my story explicitly, that that day, I took my sisters and brother, and we ran out of the house because I didn't want them to see what I saw. And you can imagine the commotion of that day, and police and so forth and so on. And I won't go into all of that. Your listeners don't need to hear that. That night, we stayed with an auntie and uncle to care for us. My mum was drunk because that was a way to kill her pain. And I lay in bed with her because I blamed myself. I'd kill my dad, right? 13-year-old, in my mind, I'd kill my dad. So I'm laying in bed trying to console her till she finally fell asleep. And then my brother and sisters were asleep, and I got up and I was walking through the house. my auntie and uncle's house, and there was just a curtain between my uncle's room and where I was walking, and he called me in and he said, let me comfort you, come and lay with me. And his form of comfort was sexual assault. So, not only had I witnessed that horror of my dad, then my uncle sexually assaulted me that night. My auntie came in screaming about it, but not at him, but me, and blamed me for what had happened. So as a 13-year-old, my life was already out of control, but it was even more out of control. So my way to try and control what was happening around me was to control everything that I could, to try and protect my mum and protect my brother and sisters, and nothing a 13-year-old child should have to do. And honestly, my story is not as bad as some and worse than others, but it's not that story. It's what you do with it as you go on. My mother, at the age of 17, on my birthday actually, committed suicide. So it was this family inheritance of that generational suicide, that wicked, that horrible thing that went on to see some sisters commit suicide as well. So it's been a journey, as I say. It's a journey of life that we're in. It's what we do with it, I think, and how we find our way through it, Wendy.
A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
And Wedny Francis today is filling in for Neil Johnson on this Monday edition of 2020. The talkback lines are open, 1800 316 316. You might have a question or a comment, or many of you would have a Bible verse or a quote that helped you get through a tough time in your life. So I'd love you to share that to benefit all of our listeners. We all experience tough times. We've just heard Wendy's story, and I did gasp in the middle of it because I had not heard her story before. Wendy, before we go on, because I've got a whole lot of questions I'd like to hear from you, particularly about your book and what you're saying in your book, and what I'd like a bit of a précis. But how did you come out of that to be the woman that you are today, a very successful professional woman? What happened?
Well, it took me a long, long time, Wendy. I was on the same trajectory as my parents. I was going down the same road, drinking heavily, even though I was married with children, trying to control, which you try to control with addictions and so forth and so on, trying to find your way. And it wasn't working. As we know, it doesn't work, right? Those things don't kill the trauma and the pain. You need to go back and deal with that. The issue was I hadn't shared my story at all, really, with anybody, except the Lord knew, right? This is where I want us to go today, because I don't want us to get caught up in my story. What happened for the first 34 years of my life was horrific. It was just all over the place, out of control. But when I was 34, I had started to go to a little country church in Newcastle, actually, outside of Newcastle, and take my children, because my life was out of control, but I wanted my kids to have a different life. So the mother heart in me knew that there needed to be something different, that there needed to be a change. I didn't want my kids to grow up the way that I'd been brought up. So I went along to this little country church, and I'm sure there were many times that I stunk of alcohol, but just these loving women just loved on me anyway. And they invited me to go along to a guest speaker, Hamish Bishop James, I think his name was. I should know that in my mind. I believe that was his name. And I wasn't going to go. I wasn't at all interested, because I wasn't going to church for me, right? I was going for my kids. And I decided, as only God will do, at the last minute that I would go along. And at the end of what this gentleman was speaking, he shared an altar call. I couldn't get out of my seat quick enough. It was like I was drawn out of my seat, almost run to the front of the church to give my heart to the Lord. But what happened next was the big thing. The lady that prayed for me said that God knew the guilt I'd carried over my father's death. So right then and there, God got my attention. Who was this God? Who was this God that he would know the guilt that I carried for killing my dad in my mind that I still carried. So that's when I made my commitment to Jesus. And that's really when my journey began, because that then becomes this marathon journey that we're in. It's not a sprint and it's not a fast race. It's the marathon journey of growing to understand who God is, who Jesus is, and the character of this God that would care enough about me to say that he knew what was happening in my heart. That was when my life started to take a different trajectory, a different turn.
So thank you for that. And, you know, our hope is in Jesus. One question that I have in my own mind just to ask you, and I hope you don't mind me asking you, but up until that time when you just committed your whole heart to Jesus, there would have been imagery in your mind that would have been there and flashed back. And for many people, whether it's an addiction to pornography or whether it's something they've seen or been exposed to, there is imagery that we have to actually try and remove from our minds. Has Jesus been able to do that for you?
Oh, absolutely. That is the grace and the mercy of our Jesus, right? To be able to come into those spaces in our heart and in our mind, like that integrated centre of our heart, and heal us in those spaces. And I wouldn't be able to talk the way I talk now about my past or write my books if there hadn't been that healing of trauma and the imagery that had affected me for so many years. And it wasn't all at once. Some people may have that happen all at once, but it's been over a period of time. And even now, Wendy, in my quiet times with the Lord, he will remind me of things that I've forgotten about. But obviously they're still there, and he will take me back in and we'll walk that through together. And that has been the most powerful healing. I'd had some, only as I've gone on in my years and after I come to the Lord, I had some counselling because I hadn't had any before, like even giving evidence in an inquest into my father's death. I never had any counselling or support. So there was a lot to work through, but nothing that healed me like Jesus coming into those spaces and removing those images from my mind.
Okay, so I'm just going to remind people to ring in. We do have a text message here. Firstly, I want to say thank you for sharing your story. I'm reading this text message. I wept when I heard it. Yeah, look, I was really affected as well. Your strength is amazing. My son was sexually abused by his teacher, and it has changed our life forever. It has been a nightmare amongst other things. I pray that my son finds peace and our Creator. I cried out to God for help when it happened and felt him with me. But the mental damage to my son and myself, I want to become a chaplain and help other parents in this position, because I have felt so powerless and I didn't have a spiritual chaplaincy offered to me. Thank you for that anonymous text message. Is there any comment that you'd like to make to that person, Wendy?
Look, my heart goes out to the mum and the son and the family. Just tragic, horrible stuff that should never happen. But there is hope. You can get past this, and the fact that you want to do something to help others is wonderful. But also finding that healing for yourself in that space and finding the healing for your son. We know that can only come from Jesus and the grace and the mercy of his presence and his kindness and his truth. Don't give up. Keep going forward. Don't give up.
So good. Thank you. Wendy, let's get on to how we don't give up, how we keep going forward. You compare our lives to running a marathon. I've got children who run marathons, and I stand there and I watch them in awe, to be honest. But explain that to me. How are you comparing our lives to this running of a marathon?
Well, it is like a marathon race. Often we think our life is a bit like a painting where it's stable and there's it's static, it doesn't move. But it is a story, and it's going all the time. And our race to finish well with the torch for Jesus still in our hand. And if you think about the old Greek marathon race, that they had to run, and they were handed a torch and they won because the torch was still alive at the end. And if you think about sometimes in a marathon, I've run a half marathon and got halfway through and thought, what am I doing? And wanted to cry and quit. And life is like that. We sometimes want to cry and quit and want to just stay in bed and pull the covers over our head. But what if we don't? What if we say, I just need to take the next step? And I'm talking from experience. I needed to take the next step. And I've only shared a portion of my story. There's always more than one piece of chaos or trial or circumstance or trauma that will come against us. And it's like that in a race. We'll trip over, we'll skin our knee, all of those things will happen. It's the getting up and keeping going that's key. Even when the circumstances around us say, just give up, like my home is full of violence, how do I survive this? You find some space with the Lord. You find what the Lord is saying for you to do in the midst of that so that you can survive it. And you surround yourself with people that will help you survive it. And I've got lots of tips that we can go on with, Wendy. I'm just not sure where you would like me to go.
Yeah, no, I'd like to do those tips. We'll probably get to them after our news break. But one of the things I guess I just want to point out to people who are listening too is that we are talking to believers, and a lot of you are people who are identifying as Christians. And we're not just talking about people who don't know Jesus who struggle, are we? We're talking about Christians who struggle. But the Christians who struggle often, I think, perhaps feel like they need to sort of mask the pain because they're Christians and they've got Jesus and of course they shouldn't be struggling and of course they should be able to know how to take that next step. So that Christians perhaps are even worse at masking what's going on. Am I on the right track there?
Absolutely. And you know what, Wendy? I was one of them. So I was sitting in a church in Brisbane, and my mask was very tight, right? Nobody knew what was going on inside me. I'd given my heart to the Lord when I was 34, but I was living off other people's faith. I didn't have that personal relationship with Jesus. And then just as life happens, something happened that I had nobody else to turn to but the Lord. I was in government and I had a complaint made against me and I was investigated by the Crime and Misconduct Commission. Anonymous complaint, fixatious complaint, but it was enough for government to stand me down, march me out of the building and put me under investigation. The enemy told me that my job made me who I was because I was still struggling with my identity. I didn't still know who I was as a child of God. I knew God, but I didn't know who I was. And it was in that moment where that spirit of suicide, that thing of suicide come back at me, that ugly thought that the only way out is to take my life. And so I sat on my lounge room floor the day after being removed from my job and I'd made a plan to commit suicide. And Wendy, that's when Jesus moved into my life in such a different way. I already knew of this God and I knew of Jesus and I knew of the Holy Spirit, but I didn't know them. So I was masked up in a church and nobody would have known what was going on for me. But we do that. We put on the mask. We think our life needs to be perfect. And underneath we're battling and we're struggling and we see that. I've sat in other churches where I've seen that happen and people have committed suicide. That's not our answer. Our answer is Jesus. So in that moment when the Lord came in and he met me, and I remember I reached out, I said, if you're real, I need to touch the hem of your gown. If I can touch the hem of your gown, I will get through this. And that's when God met me. That's when Jesus came in like a flood. We hear that in the word, that he will come in like a flood, and he did. And honestly, Wendy, that's when my life turned in a different way. It's almost like when Moses turned to the bush that was on fire to hear what God was saying, I turned so that I could actually hear, not what others were saying, but what God was saying to me.
Something that you've said or you've written, I've got down here as a quote from you, courage is not the absence of fear, it's the will to persevere in the face of fear. So we're talking about courage, but just extrapolate a little bit on that, what's needed and some of the steps that we need. Like, it's all very well to say to somebody, have courage, be strong, be brave, but what are the actual steps that you would talk us through?
Okay, I'll just recap a little bit on courage, and then I'll go into some of the steps that I think are really relevant and important. For me, I'm an imagery person. I like to write, so I see pictures as I write stories and books and so forth. So imagery for me is important. So I feel courage is like the door that's inside everybody. We all have it. The door handle, though, is on our side and not on the outside where somebody else can open it for us. So for me, courage is only a door that we can open ourselves. We can cheer others on, but it does take the individual to open that door to courage. And I'm talking from experience that when we take that first step and open the door and say, I am going to take the next courageous step, then more courage builds. And honestly, fear, it gets behind us in so many ways when we step over it. Often I will say, yep, I see you, fear, but you know what? I'm going to step over you because my courage in God is stronger. And I think that's really important. So we don't have to have it. Every morning I'll pray, God, give me your courage to get through this day. And he does. And there's times when I need it like 99.9% every minute of the day, and other times 150%. But it is there, and it helps us to get across this finish line. Some of the tips that I've learned, and one of the big ones, and you know what, I'm still on a journey, Wendy. You know, I always talk to the Lord at the beginning of the year about what is it you want me to grow in this year, and this year it was more maturity and even a deeper level of trust. And I said, but I trust you, Lord. And he said, yes, but I want a deeper level of trust. And that comes back to making that choice every single day that we'll choose Jesus. And I was reading this in John Eldridge's new book, and he talks about the fact that we have to keep choosing Jesus over and over again. We make that one great choice, but then every day we choose Jesus. And for a couple of years now, in the morning when I wake up, I'll say, Father, Jesus, Holy Spirit, I choose you above all things. So I'm making a choice. And the reason I do that is I had to learn that there was a power in the choice that I made every day. Whether my choice was to be angry or to have a bad attitude, when in the early days was my choice to drink or not drink. And so every day I needed to make a choice. So every day still, for years and years and years, I make that choice to choose Jesus every morning. That's just the start, because change begins in us, right? Change begins in us with the choices that we make.
That's right. And, but, you know, can I just say that, and I'm loving what you're saying, but, you know, we are seeing a lot of people who feel like they are absolutely broken beyond repair, that their wounds are just too deep.
Yeah.
There's the trauma, the disappointment, but also they've made too many mistakes. And so they can't forgive themselves, let alone feel as if they can be forgiven.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is so important, Wendy. And I touched on it in the break that forgiveness is such a big key. You know, I learned to forgive the people that had hurt me, but forgiving myself was the biggest thing. And I think it's the hardest thing. It's the thing that the enemy of our souls plays around in, that you're not worthy. And I've been reading about Sarah and Abraham and all the mistakes that they made. And it wasn't that they were brilliantly faithful in those areas where they made mistakes, but they tapped into God's faithfulness despite the things they did wrong, and God moved in. And it's the same for us. You know, we think we're not worthy, and that's a lie of the enemy. That's a mask that is thrown at us. You know, the world tells us, I did it for years. The world told me I would end up like my parents. But what if I didn't? What if I took one step? What if the one step is that you just get out of bed? What is the one step that you actually reach out to someone that can help you? It does take one step, Wendy, and it does take one choice. That's how the healing starts. And it is hard. I'm not saying this race is not an easy race to run. I know, I've run it. And I'm still running it daily. We all are. You will be as well, Wendy. But it is about what is the choice that I can make now. And I often say that the choices we make will affect somebody else. Our private decisions will have an effect on somebody else. My parents' private decision to take their life, my uncle's decision to abuse me, they all had an effect on me and played out towards others. So what I learned out of that, and I don't dwell in that because God has brought me through it, is that the decisions I make will have a fallout effect on other people. So what if I make a different decision? And so I'm learning to make better decisions, as we do every day in this chaotic, crazy world that we live in, where trauma and things come at us all the time.
So let's go back to the marathon imagery as well, because for some, they're listening to us now and they're thinking, yeah, that's okay, but for me it's just impossible. I just can't even put that one step in front of the other. I just can't. And life is a marathon, and so they're in the middle of this marathon right now. And so one of the things that you talk about in your book is training actually for the middle. So, yeah. So we're here now in the middle. What do we do? What are we doing? We just can't do what you're saying we should do.
Yep. We're stuck in the middle of it. We've hit a wall and we can't get up, but we can do something. So what is it that you can do? Because what happens is, and don't forget, we're in a world at war, right? We have an enemy. We have Satan is our enemy. The devil is our enemy, and he will stop us. He will tell us we can't. And what can happen, Wendy, is we allow what we can't do stop us from doing what we can. Maybe all we can do today is to get up and make a cup of tea. Maybe all we can do is to send somebody a text and say, I need help, or phone somebody, or have a shower. It's doing the one thing that we can do. And I know we feel we can't. I was there. I couldn't do anything. I know that it is hard, and I work with women that find it incredibly hard, and men. But it is doing the one thing that you can do. There's always one thing we can do. And whatever that is, whether it's you pick up the word, whether you listen to the Vision Radio and the worship channel and you've got that worship flowing over the top of you, it's finding the one thing that you can do to feed your soul, because it's our soul care in these trauma moments that we need that will take us to the next step.
When it's happened, when I've been in those times of despair, I've lost 2 sisters to cancer. I've experienced my husband's brother taking his life too. So there's not many Australians, I think, who have not walked a journey and knowing someone who has taken their life. So there's part of our lives as well. I found that a daily habit can help me, a discipline. But that even takes training, going back to the marathon sort of idea as well. What do you say in your book about that sort of idea of training for a marathon?
And your daily disciplines, absolutely right, Wendy. It's the things that become a bit habitual, the daily habits that change our lives. So it's those habits for me, and everybody will be different. And Wendy, you'll have different ways of doing it. It's, I'm in the Word in the morning. I sit with the Lord. I put music on, whatever it is, so that I can be journaling. I can be reading the Word. It's the daily things that make me strong. So chewing on the Word, not taking teaspoons of the Word, but chewing on the Word and getting it into our hearts so that it's there, like reading Psalm 91 over and over and over, or listening to the audio on your Bible app of Psalm 91 or Psalm 23. Getting those verses into your spirit are very, very helpful. So I have a morning habit. Part of my training, I get up early. I sit quietly with the Lord. Neil and I spoke about this last time. I have a daily reading that I read. I read the Word. I journal. I have worship in the house when I can, and the evening, and I pray, of course, and the evening's the same. I pray, I read the Word before I go to sleep, because I want to get those things into my mind, and they're the things that actually help remove those trauma images too, Wendy.
So if you've been trying to ring in and having difficulty, I believe our number is back up and running. So if you want to ring in, it's 1-800-316-316. We haven't got a long time left with Wendy Burns, but and I'm sorry that it hasn't been working for that length of time, but if you'd like to ring in now, you can. So 1-800-316-316. I think, Wendy, the Word to me is one of the ways that it's sort of an easy way to encourage your heart, because as soon as you open it up. But there are times too when it feels like no matter what you're reading, it's just like words. But there is still an edification that comes from reading God's Word, that even if you don't feel it, I believe. Do you feel that as well? There are times when I read and I just feel like, Lord, please speak to me, you know?
Absolutely. We can read and read and read and feel like we're not getting anything. And in those moments, and I like a paper Bible, I like my paper word, like I need to see the paper and touch it. But in those moments, I will often pull up the Bible app on my phone and let the audio of the Bible speak across my soul. And I find that really ministers to me as well. But it is about, as you say, bringing in the word into our lives, which is because it becomes God's strength, not our strength. We can't get up. We can't keep going in our own strength. That's the resilience that comes when we lean into the Lord and we allow him to be our strength. So often in just saying, you know, I can't do it in my own strength, but I know your word says to me that I can tap into your strength, you know, that I can drip, I can't even say it now, drink deeply of the pleasures of your word. And I love that. I love that we can do that. And Psalm 16 in the NIV says this, it says, keep me safe, my God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. Apart from you, I have no good thing. So they're coming into refuge. I have some declarations that I say in every morning that, you know, I take refuge in you, Lord. I take refuge in your love. You know, I take refuge in under the shelter of the shadow of your wings. You know, even if Psalm 91 is very powerful for those things, Wendy.
It's wonderful. We have got some callers coming in, Wendy, so we're going to open the line now and talk to Nick, who's in New South Wales. Thanks for calling in, Nick, and thank you for your patience. What would you like to tell us today?
Just thanks for the interview. It's really, really good. One thing that I've been a Christian for 45 years and only had a very short time drinking alcohol. I've never had a problem with alcohol. My father did, but I didn't. And I completely gave it up when I was a Christian. But what I want to comment on is that I think young Christians should be encouraged to, not necessarily encouraged, but to be given an example that being someone who doesn't drink alcohol at all in a culture where it turns bad is probably a good thing. But I don't think the churches teach that as strongly as what they could. I know alcohol is not forbidden in the Bible, but Paul said, I won't eat meat if it's going to cause my brother to stumble. And he knew it was lawful. Yeah. He knew it was lawful, but he didn't want to do it for a stumbling. So all I'm saying is that, we could step up a bit on talking about the dangers of alcohol in the stupid culture we're in at the moment.
I really appreciate you calling in, Nick, and I think it's a valid point. And I think anybody listening can really come before the Lord and ask him about that too, because certainly alcohol can be one of the largest stumbling blocks we have in our Australian culture. We'll thank you for calling, Nick. Bernadette's ringing in from Kingston in South Australia. Hi, Bernadette.
Good morning, Wendy. Good morning, Wendy and Wendy. Look, I can identify with that, with what you've shared. I grew up in like with alcohol and sexual abuse and the whole lot, and then I blocked it out of my life, and then something happened, a trigger happened, and I went through the whole stuff again. But now I'm overcoming that because I've had some counselling, and having a relationship with Jesus is really helping. And even when I've had a thing where I couldn't see my grandchild because she's in New South Wales and I'm in South Australia, through transport difficulties, I learned to do FaceTime. So God's helping me to work through and look outside the box. Yeah. And even though I don't have family down here, and I've got family that I don't see, I've got a Christian networking of Christian friends, which are like family, and we do stuff together. And I'm grateful for the Christian radio and just the opportunities I get to share Jesus. Going out, encouraging, helping other people helps me, and that encourages me because someone else is worse off than me. And I think when I'm going through a difficult thing, I'm thinking, what can I do to bless someone else and help someone else? And that's what lifts me up. And
well, Bernadette,
beautiful.
Bernadette, you just ringing in today has lifted other people up as well, because personal stories is what it happens. So it lifts people up. So thank you so much for calling in, Bernadette. We appreciate it. I'm going to keep going because we've got a few callers because we've had a problem, but thank you for calling in. We had a couple of texts come in as well. Someone's shared Psalm 27:10. I can only declare his faithfulness 59 years on. That's a wonderful testimony. Thank you, James. And Sue has sent in, thank you, Wendy, that's you, Wendy, for being so brave in light of your harrowing journey from childhood and the courage you live out to this day. You are an incredible inspiration, and not least of all to myself. You are clearly helping so many broken lives, and I trust and pray God brings you greater blessings with each new day. Thank you so much. That's Sue from Kingston in Tasmania. Do you want to just make a comment there, Wendy?
No, just, thank you.
Yeah,
I just think, God, what can you say?
Yeah.
It's God's story. My story is God's story.
Beautiful. Vince in Brisbane. We're going to move to Vince. Thank you for calling in. Vince, how are you today?
Good, thanks, Wendy. And Wendy, look, morning. Wendy, look, I'd like to just commend you, first of all, the incredible tribulation that you've gone through. It's amazing, especially what you had with what your uncle did to you after what you experienced. But what I want to get to is what was really intriguing. You mentioned like touching the robe of Jesus, and it automatically may remind me of a book I read 19 years ago. It's a fictitious book, but it is based kind of on the life of Jesus, called The Robe. And it's about a Roman centurion. He was traumatized with guilt over having partaken in the crucifixion of Jesus, and he descended into a state of complete utter depression. But when he was on holiday in Athens on leave, he ended up touching actually Jesus' robe, and from that point he was like cured instantly, and he was converted on the spot.
Yeah, Vince, I think there's a movie about it as well, and I've read that book. I remember as a child, it had a really, really old cover and a bit tattered, but I can recommend it as well. Vince, thank you so much for calling in.
Yeah.
It's a good book review because that is a really worthwhile book to read, everybody. There's one more call that we'll take, and it's Wendy from Connemara. It's really the day of Wendy's today. I'd be interested, I'm not going to ask you on air, but I'd be interested to know our birth dates, our birth years.
Oh,
because
hello.
it seems
You're cutting out.
Oh, sorry, Wendy. It seems like most Wendys are around the same generation, but Wendy from Connemara, have I got you now? Would you like to speak?
I would. Thank you for this subject. It's so important. I mean, alcohol had killed or destroyed generations of my family. And then in 2001, something drastic happened. And somebody in the room said to me, you need Jesus. So my life immediately changed. A month later, my husband's life changed. And we've both given up alcohol. 15 years later, my brother's given up alcohol, which was amazing.
Praise
and I am
God.
a baby boomer. I also live in Connemara. And alcohol is destroying generations here. And it's a big thing. Our church talks about it, about abstaining from alcohol, because that gentleman earlier said it's a stumbling block to people, so we don't want to be a stumbling block. But thank you for talking about that, and we all know God is in control, but we just have to be who we have to be and tell the truth.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for
God's
calling
truth.
in. Yeah.
Wendy, how amazing is that?
I know. It's the trifecta, isn't it? I really love it. Wendy Burns, can I come back to you?
Yeah.
Do you have a comment about alcoholism in Australia? Is there a call to abstain from alcohol in your mind?
Oh, I'm in Darwin, so yes, absolutely. We're seeing incredible violence brought on by alcohol up here. So, I think it's an individual thing, but I think there's a time for us, I guess, to speak out. And I think it's in the power of our testimonies that people see that alcohol is not the answer, because it's, it's about letting people see that it's better choices and different choices. Yeah. When we force that on people, it means it goes undercover. I see that in community up here. So I don't know the answer, but other than Jesus, I only know that. Yeah. I know that finding the Lord is what we need. And I know we're running out of time, Wendy. And I did want to say, no matter what, we are not defeated. We will overcome. God's victory in our life will prevail. He is in control. We are not. Faith in God is the victory that overcomes what's going on around us. No one can extinguish the flame of God that kindles in our heart. And that's where that faith partners with trust in God. And I think, that's what my story wants to be. When I leave this earth and I go home to Jesus, that people will say that my heart was turned to the Lord and that my faith and trust in him was evident. And that's the journey that we're on, Wendy. And if we can help others on that journey, then my life was worth it all.
Well, you've certainly done that for us today, Wendy Burns. Your website is wendyburnsconsulting.com.au. So that's one word, wendyburnsconsulting.com.au. There's 2 books that I would recommend from Wendy, Unmask, Stop Hiding and Start Living. That comes also with a companion journal, so you can actually map your progress with this book, Unmask, Stop Hiding, Start Living. And then there is an earlier book, and it's just called Remarkable You, and I think that has more of Wendy's story. But Wendy Burns, people can get those books on your website. Are there other places they can get them?
They can get Unmasked at Coorong. You can get it on my website. You can get it on bookstores, Amazon, all those places. It is out there. And on my website, you can just reach out to me and I'll send it and I'll sign it and write you a little note.
Oh, wow, that's really special. I'll be doing that. Wendy Burns, it's been so wonderful to talk to you this morning. There's not a person who doesn't go through deep valleys. You've been through more than your fair share. And you've come through with the shine of Jesus on your face. I can see it. We can hear it in your voice. And so I would say to people today, there is hope, and that hope is Jesus. People are saying, is there any hope at all? Yes, the hope is Jesus. And no matter what stage you are in your life, there is something that you can do in his strength to move forward. And so I would recommend Wendy's books to you. I really appreciate, Wendy, you coming on this morning. I've certainly been blessed by the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wendy. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.